stay in the game. Things are going to get hard. Year one might be awful. Year two, you're going to want to quit. Year three might get a little bit easier. By year four and year five, things will probably really start looking up. So in those moments, write down on a sticky note, just stay in the game.
Robbie Crosier, welcome to the show.
Absolutely, man. Happy to be here. Appreciate you taking the time.
So, at the age of 28, not only are you a practicing lawyer, but you're also an entrepreneur. Not many law school graduates think about starting their own law firm after earning their degree. What drove you to try something different?
Yeah, so for me, starting a law firm was not necessarily, and even being an attorney wasn't like my childhood goal or dream professionally. Really, my goal was always to own a small business. And that's because I think the primary motivation, anyways, is my dad has a small optometry practice, and I'd grow up, rolling around his office at night on the wheelie chairs and, trying on all the glasses and just kind of getting to experience a cool behind the scenes look at what it looks like to experience small business ownership. And so I think, really early on, the goal was to follow in his footsteps and go into optometry. Later on, as I kind of explored that field, I decided that ultimately wasn't for me, but I knew that I wanted to operate some kind of professional practice, and law is actually, I think, in my opinion, one of the lowest barrier to entry jobs to go solo like that and kind of hang a shingle, especially early on, because unlike other careers, there's very little overhead in law. You really just need a laptop, some legal software, and that's it, a phone. And so you can really, as long as you have good mentors and a good team behind you, you can really get started earlier in that field than you can in others.
Oftentimes, when we do something that other people can't imagine themselves doing, we get put down for it, and that's especially true for entrepreneurs. When people see someone starting their own business rather than going down the conventional route of getting a job, being an associate in law, I'm sure you went through a similar thing when you first started your law firm and things were picking up kind of slowly. Every entrepreneur goes through that stage when no one believes in them and they don't have the results to show for anything, but they just have to stick to what they're doing and keep going. What helped you stay dedicated and really commit to having your own law firm?
I think for me, it was, there weren't necessarily a lot of haters, nobody, in fact, it's kind of been the opposite in law. I think that attorneys are notoriously risk averse, which is not super surprising. And so I got a lot of encouragement when I hung a shingle. Mostly, other attorneys like, oh my gosh, like I could never do that so early. A lot of folks probably thinking it wasn't a good idea, behind the scenes, but nobody told me that outright, at least. I would say that, to your point, though, the bigger problem, especially for me, is it's mostly internal. There's a lot of doubt, a lot of imposter syndrome, especially earlier on. Things have gotten easier as time has gone on. But regardless of what field you're in, you're going to struggle with these things. You're going to have, especially for me, one of the biggest things I think has been the high highs and the low lows of practice and kind of the unpredictability month to month of income, because you just don't know, especially early on as you're kind of developing a book of business and getting more clients, before you have hundreds to refer you and kind of steady that out a little bit. You're going to have months up here, and the next month's going to be down here, and maybe you'll have 2 really great months followed by an awful month. You just never know, and it's hard not to, even though that this is the way it's going to go, it's hard not to take things personally in the moment. And when you have those down months, think to yourself like, oh my gosh, what have I done wrong this particular month? And you kind of have to step back and realize, no, this is just how it's going to be for a while. And focus on kind of weathering that storm. Last thing I'll say on that is some of the best advice that I've been given by a couple different mentors now is it's a long-term game, and if you can just stick with it for 5 years, you'll make it. Basically, the advice I was given was just stay in the game. Between years 1 and year 5, just think, stay in the game. And there are going to be moments when you don't want to do that, and I can tell you personally there are frequently moments that I feel that. But I've got a little sticky note on my monitor that says "Stay in the game," and I look at that and think, nope, just 3 more years, we can stick this out, and it'll be good.
Yeah, and I also heard that in a podcast where they were talking about it's not to win. The whole point of the game is to stay in it and not to win. And if you're staying in it long enough, then eventually you're going to end up winning it anyway. When did you initially think about starting your own law firm? What made you have the realization that this is something that you want to do?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't always a law firm was not always the plan. It was just some kind of small business that I could own and operate myself. And I think it materialized into a law firm really pretty late. It wasn't until a year after I graduated from my undergrad Baylor. And I was, at the time, I don't think, it's not something I've kept secret, but not a ton of people know. I went into the Baylor MBA program for 1 semester after graduation, really because I had no idea what it was I wanted to do. I had a fiance at the time who was still a couple years behind me in undergrad, or soon to be fiance. And so I wanted to stick around, stay in Waco with her. I just didn't necessarily know, what that looked like. So I thought grad school, like a lot of folks do. I had a somewhat obscure Bachelor of Arts degree. I wasn't sure what to do with it, but I knew it could probably get me into the Baylor MBA program. And so I kind of defaulted into that. And as I was in there for that semester, I found myself kind of wondering, like, what is the next step here? What am I trying to do? And I really didn't love what I was doing. I didn't see a clear end goal for me. I now kind of have my own take on when MBAs are valuable and when they're not. And I think that I fell into the latter category in that situation. And so I was kind of I realized for me, I thought I probably made a mistake and was looking for an out. And it just so happened that Texas A&M. I'd thought about law school for a few years, really since like senior year of high school when I watched Suits. That was really, yeah, which is relevant and again now since it's been on Netflix. There's gonna be a whole new wave of lawyers doing the same thing that I did. But I thought about it, and really beyond just that, I've always been whichever side of the brain is a little bit more reading, writing, critical thinking oriented. I've kind of fallen into that category. More of a English literature guy than a math science guy. And so law school had always been something I had been interested in, but when I made the leap into the MBA program, I just wasn't really ready to commit to 3 years of school, and so that's why I chose that. But at this point, I was like, I think I should explore what this would look like if I even have a shot getting in somewhere decent. And at the time, Texas A&M Law School had just been created. Texas A&M acquired Texas Wesleyan School of Law in 2014, and so this was just a few years after that. There's this new law school that happened to be in Fort Worth, not too far away from where my parents lived. I thought, oh, that could be a pretty good fit. And A&M's a great name. I figured they'd probably dump a lot of money into this thing and make it pretty decent over the next few years, and so it could be, a good investment, kind of a good gamble to take. And it just so happened the icing on the cake for me was that year they had started taking the GRE instead of the LSAT as like part of a pilot program. And not a lot of people knew about it then. I still don't think a lot of people know about it now if they're still doing it. But I had taken the GRE to get into my MBA program, and I was like, oh, I already have this test. I don't need to take the LSAT. I'm just going to send this over, and like, who knows? And to my surprise, they said, yeah, come on down. And so we did it, and that's kind of where that path started. Not really, I'd like to say that it was more calculated than it was, but it was kind of just stumbling one foot in front of another until I got where I'm at now.
So after you graduated, what route did you take after that? And when eventually did you end up starting Crosier Law Firm? And when was the exact point that you realized that you wanted to start or have your own law firm rather than work your way up in someone else's firm?
So I started my firm a little under 2 years, I think, after I got licensed. It may have been a little bit quicker than that, maybe a little over a year. And I had been planning on doing that since day one. So since really first year of law school, I was and my peers, my friends from class can tell you that I was drawing law school logos during civil procedure class and things like that, which is reflected in my grades. Um, but that was always what I wanted to do. I would, I'd commute to and from school listening to law practice management podcasts, all 3 years. It was just that was interesting to me. To be completely honest, the substantive study of law was not as interesting to me as the idea of opening a law practice and building that business and, exploring that. And so I knew, again, kind of from the beginning, that was the route I wanted to take. The question for me was like, when is the right time? Like you mentioned, when's the right time to do that? How much experience do you need before you can open a practice? And I think I know you'll get varying answers on that topic. And I don't think that there's one right answer. I think it's a combination of your circumstances and your capacity. I'll be the first to say, I am no legal genius. I don't claim to be. But what I think I am is resourceful and not too risk averse, which are really, in my opinion, the two qualities that you need to do this. You don't need to be the brightest crayon in the crayon box to, to make this work. Obviously, there's like a minimum level of competency, but if you've gone to law school and passed the bar, you probably qualify. And so what I decided, I also had some other stuff going on. I was newly married after law school, and we were, buying homes and a single home and figuring all this stuff out. And so I was kind of balancing that risk with like, oh, we're, trying to kind of build lives for ourselves, and we'll probably have a family here in a few years. Like, how do I want all this to shake out with like, and kind of balance that with like what my goals and ambitions are responsibly. And it just so happened that I got some really good practical experience during law school. I think probably more hands-on experience than a lot of students get because of a certain firm I was at. And they're great folks down there. Like a lot of law firms, the philosophy is kind of, you go into the deep end and see if you can swim. That's how it is with mentorship and things like that, of course. And so I learned a ton there that I felt, and it was a small firm, and I was friends with the owners and was kind of able to see behind the scenes, like, okay, what does it look like to manage a firm, and learned during those 2 years, like, okay, I think this isn't necessarily, it's not easy, but it's not rocket science. Like, I can figure this out. From like the marketing to the management to the intake system, things like that. And so shortly after that, I had the opportunity to work with one of my professors from law school who does similar kind of work to what I do now. And she knew I was interested in opening my own practice, and she really graciously kind of took me under her wing for a few months to give me the fast track and what it would look like to run a practice and also practice the kind of law that I'm practicing now. And then after that, I felt pretty equipped. And I think the last thing I'll say on that is I'm still careful, to kind of stay in my lane. There's, it's an interesting balancing act of wanting to stay in your lane and make sure that you don't take something on that's beyond your capacity while still, looking to grow your business and stretch yourself and grow, as a practitioner and things like that. And so that's kind of an ongoing battle. But I do think that I've seen a lot of attorneys bite off more than they can chew and get in tough situations ethically. And that was definitely not something that I wanted to experience. And so I took on as much as I could early on. And then as I was kind of getting to what I felt was like, okay, I'll probably need some additional help here to continue growing, started talks with a friend and mentor of mine about partnership, which is something that's probably coming up here within the next few months.
So this decision that you made led to something very innovative, which opened up a whole new realm of possibilities for aspiring lawyers. I don't think the idea of having an online law firm would have been very appealing pre-COVID, but now that everything can be done online, this idea is possible and also very innovative. It opens up a new business model for those interested in law and having their own business. What are some of the pros and cons of having an online law firm?
Yeah, so I think you're totally right about that. And I'm happy to say that it's becoming slowly becoming known. That model is becoming a little bit more popular, like you mentioned, especially post-COVID. Because before that, there weren't a whole lot of folks doing it, to my knowledge. But I think that, like I mentioned earlier, one of the great things about law as a career is that it can be very low overhead. Um, Really, like I said, all you need is a computer, some software, and a telephone. And so for me, again, I think one of the differences, an additional benefit of this is that it's not only convenient for you, but it's convenient for the client because often a client will not want to meet in an attorney's office. And I think, in my opinion, this doesn't just apply to attorneys, but other professionals as well. I think that, and there are some exceptions to this, but I think generally it's the attorney who wants to meet in his or her office more often than the client does, because we spend time and money furnishing these things, getting bookshelves with books we've never read, and all this stuff to make it look nice. And so you're paying rent on it, so you want clients to come in there and see how great you are. And I definitely think that there is something to like legitimizing your operation with a good-looking office, if that's something you've got the funding for. But I have only ever had one client in the year and a half, year and 7 months that we've had our doors open so far that's ever asked to meet in person at my office. And so our situation, and I think this is pretty common, we have an office space in Dallas that we can physically go to when we want to, but it's kind of like a pay-as-you-go situation, where if we want to use a conference room, we can reserve it. If we want to use regular office space, we can reserve that. But we don't need to pay kind of a regular monthly lease on it. And that's worked out great because we get the address, we have the space available if we need it, or if we have a bigger client who wants an in-person meeting like that. But like I said, we've only ever had that request one time so far in a year and a half. And so most clients love the idea. We do our consultations over Zoom. Everybody loves it so far. And then if we want to, because I do think there's something to like taking the interpersonal relationship a little bit further with certain clients. And so when we want to do that, we just go out to lunch or go out to dinner or drinks or coffee, whatever it is. There are lots of ways to do that. And I think everyone would prefer to do that in a setting like that rather than a stuffy office.
What advice would you give someone who's looking to be a lawyer, whether they're in high school, college, or law school?
So starting with high school, college, I would say my number one advice would be you don't need to get some kind of liberal arts degree. You don't need to get a political science degree. You can, and if that's what you're interested in and that's what you want to do, that's great. But the beauty of law school is as long as you've got the GPA, they don't really care at all what your major is. And so if I could go back, I would probably get a degree in business. And this doesn't just apply to folks that want to open their own firm. This is for all law students. I would get a degree in something that's practical outside of the law. Because that, especially if you have the foresight to know what practice area you might want to be in, that could be a useful thing. So if, for example, if you want to practice tax law, doing a lot of taxing and accounting classes could be useful. If you want to practice business law, majoring in business and taking a lot of practical courses is probably the way you want to go. That's the beauty of law school. Just focus on maintaining that GPA because they do care about that and they do look at that. For law students, you're kind of already in it. And like I had alluded to before, I was not the king of law students. I saw law school as a job I had to do. I'd get in and get out of there as quickly as I can. Made some great friends, which was the best part. But I really didn't want to be there, to be totally honest. Got my act together a little bit third year, especially because I realized I'm fixing to be in the real world here. I need to kind of figure out what's going on. Law school generally does not prepare you for practice anyways, regardless of how seriously you take it. And I would advise law students to take it seriously. But I can tell you for certain, it does not prepare you for practice. Practical experience prepares you for practice. So focusing on getting good internships, good clerkships, the stuff you do in the summer really, really does make a big impact on what you end up doing in your career. So I would focus on that.
So you mentioned this earlier, and this was something that I was also discussing in the previous episode with Project Lead Nation owner Michael Smith. We were talking about how, as an employee, there's always a limit to how much you can make. If you went down the path of being an associate, your income would have always had a limit and would have grown a lot slower than it does now. Now that you have your own business, you're 100% responsible for how much you're making, and you said that sometimes that's a little bit scary, but I actually prefer it that way. Would you agree with that, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It really, for me, I think, is the way that I'm wired. I've never been a great employee from high school on. I just have always been more interested in kind of doing my own thing. And I don't think that's, you see that as something that's, praised a lot on like social media and all this, hashtag boss babe stuff. And I really don't want to lean into that and glorify it. I think some people are just wired differently. I don't think it's better or worse. For me, this kind of path, it really did feel like was my only option. And honestly, sometimes I wish it wasn't. I wish that I could more easily, fit into the traditional role. But that said, it really, I can't imagine it any other way. It's been great, and I love it. Fits going back to kind of risk aversion, risk tolerance. I'm a really risk tolerant dude, and I love the prospect of, unlimited earning potential, only limited by how much I can do, who I can reach, things like that. And I'm willing to take the downsides with that. What I'll say on that topic is that it is a lot easier if you have a safety net. Not everybody has that luxury, but for me, my wife and I both work. And she has been an angel in helping, support this venture, and has made it a lot easier for me to take those big risks. They still hurt because we do count on income from both of us. And so in the down months still hurt, but I can't pretend that I'm out here, just completely forging my path all by myself. It does help to have some support when you can get it.
So obviously, Crosier Law Firm would not have been able to be a reality if you didn't go to college and then law school. Would you say that you learned much of what you do with your business in college and law school, or did you learn it by yourself?
Yeah, so I would say I learned the majority of it by myself, and also through practical experiences with working with other small firms and sole practitioners, things like that. But like I mentioned before, listening to 30 minutes of law practice management podcasts every day to and from law school for a few years, things like that really did make a difference. Doing a lot of reading on my own. There are a lot of fantastic resources out there. You've kind of got to filter through the chaff because there's a lot of, cheap money grab stuff too. But once you find the good stuff, which is usually referred by other folks who have kind of gone before you and done this, you can really learn a lot on your own. And if you're the kind of personality that's inclined towards that kind of thing, you can really get there pretty quick.
So what's your take on college in general?
That's a loaded question. I'll give you without any more context, I'll just kind of give you my first impression, initial take. I loved college. I loved my experience. I think that there are a few different ways you can do it. So my experience, like I didn't really never had ambitions to go Ivy League. I wasn't looking at Harvard and Yale, Stanford, things like that. I wasn't raised in that environment because I really do think for the most part, that whether or not you end up at a place like that is heavily dictated by your family and kind of who, if you have history, not necessarily money, in a lot of cases, money is a part of it. But expectations and goals, like if you're I think a lot of folks, and I can't speak from experience here, but in my guess is that a lot of folks who end up in places like that had that path set out pretty early in life. I came from a more traditional background. Both my parents, like, higher education was a pretty common thing in our family. My mom has her MBA, and my dad is an optometrist, and so I can't pretend. It's not as though I came from nothing or anything like that. But we always focused more on the college experience than I wasn't like, oh, let's see how fast I can graduate and get out of here and get a job in private equity and do this and that, whatever, and move up north. Like, for me, it was much more, my parents went to Baylor. I grew up going to Baylor football games. I like this kind of vibe and these people, this institution. And so in the history there, in this personal history we have there, and so that's where I ended up going. I was heavily involved with extracurriculars while I was there, and really kind of made that my focus, even potentially at the to the detriment of other grades and other things. I did all right, but that certainly was not my primary focus. I was in a fraternity and other social organizations, and really cared a lot about making the time that I had there with those people as special as I could. And I really don't regret it at all. Every time I met my wife there through one of those organizations, so can't say it was all bad. And I definitely don't think this is if you go a different path, this is not the right path, the only right path. But I think it was the right path for me. For somebody, again, if I had aspirations to move to New York and work in the world's largest firms and go that direction, I would have had to do things a little bit differently. But that's not what I wanted, and I'm pretty happy dude where I'm at now.
I think I completely agree with all that. It just really depends on who you are, and there's a lot of different benefits and different cons when it comes to college. Like, when it comes to having your own business, it'll teach you a good amount, and then there's a lot more that you're going to have to learn on your own. But then again, the connections, the network, the experiences, the lessons, I feel like all that is really part of it. And also, I feel like a really big thing is the discipline, and that goes with school in general and college in general, is that, like, I know for kids my age, we don't get to build that anywhere else. We don't get to build that discipline of showing up no matter what at a certain time, doing what you're supposed to do, your homework, studying for exams, no matter what, because you don't really have a choice. You have to stay disciplined and do that. And so I feel like although what we learn isn't the most applicable to what we want to do, at the same time, it's very important in the lessons that it teaches us in general. As business owners, starting a business is the easiest thing and also the most exciting part. And I think this is advice that I could use as well, because I've been able to accomplish starting a business, but I struggle with actually scaling it and sticking with it. And that's the hard part, because it's long hours, paperwork, and less enjoyable stuff than actually creating the business, which is making the website, making the logos. That's the fun part. And you've been able to scale Crosier Law Firm pretty well by working on the harder things, the contracts, the paperwork for clients, and you've been able to put in that work and scale it and stick with it and create something pretty amazing. What's the key for you in scaling, and how were you able to scale Crosier Law Firm to where it is today?
Yeah, so full disclosure, we're still a relatively small shop, but we have survived the last year and a half, and we've, in terms of revenue, we've scaled that way, which is, I guess, the most important way to scale, pretty well from the beginning. And I totally agree with you. And honestly, I am kind of wired the same way. Like, I enjoy the entrepreneurial aspect of owning this business and operating it. And the substantive work is something that is, in my opinion, kind of a necessary evil. Not always. I really do enjoy my practice area, working with startups and small business owners, because I really, for that same reason, I kind of get to experience the secondhand excitement of another person starting a business venture, and I think it's really special to get to walk alongside them and kind of guide them in their early stages as well. And so I kind of get it from both sides, my own entrepreneurial journey and clients and theirs, which is really cool. But what I would say is if you're wired like you and me, and you would prefer to just kind of, move fast and break things and start things and run off to the next one, discipline is the key. And forcing yourself to sit down and do the stuff that sucks, because doing the stuff that sucks is the only way that your business will not only grow but survive in the first place. It doesn't matter how good your socials are, how pretty your logo is, if your work product sucks. That's the reality of the situation. And a good veneer on the outside can get clients in the door initially, but it's not going to be what sustains you for the long term. And so I don't think it's as simple as just kind of taking your medicine and doing it. Sometimes it is, but really putting systems in place to make sure that you get work done when it needs to get done is the key, especially for, scatterbrained folks like me.
What keeps you going in times of difficulty, whether it's with a client or an external matter not related to business? How do you stay focused towards your work and keep going, even if you're struggling with something, whether it be in your business or outside?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think having the right support systems is what does it for me. First and foremost, my wife, Skylar, who is gracious enough to manage her own issues working full time at a startup here, and also kind of bear the weight of my stress and what's going on in my practice. She really is having somebody like that who you can lean on and vent to and talk through issues with is, beyond helpful. And past that, I would say, really having good relationships with, I think the word mentors is, overused, but it's really the only word to describe them. Mentors and generally folks who have kind of gone before and done this. They don't even need to be people you keep in contact with regularly. I think it's definitely good to have like a mentor or two that you do, stay in contact with. But I've sought out other successful practitioners here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area to kind of talk through their journey and talk through what I'm doing, really for the sole purpose of kind of getting like a litmus test on, okay, how am I doing? Because the one thing that you don't get in my position or the position of anybody else who's kind of doing their own thing, you don't have a boss telling you great job or bad job, or, you need to do this or you need to do that. Like, and not getting that feedback can be really tough, because often you just don't really know. I mean, you know whether or not you're in the red or in the black, but you don't necessarily know, like, relative to other sole practitioners doing this kind of thing, like, how am I doing? Where do I stack up? And so having conversation with people like that who have told me, like, oh, you're doing phenomenally, has been incredibly reassuring, because you don't feel like it. Most days you don't feel like it. You feel like you're just trying to survive. And so it's really fantastic to talk to somebody, 20, 30 years, even like 10, 15 years ahead of you, to tell you like, oh no, actually when I was in your shoes, we weren't doing half that much, to be able to say like, okay, it's okay. Things are going all right.
So you're an entrepreneur in that you have your own business and you work with entrepreneurs to help them with their legal matters. I'm sure you've had a lot of experience with also like yourself and also other different business owners. And from all that experience, what do you think are some of the personality traits that you notice amongst the most successful of entrepreneurs?
Yeah. I think I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's the same two things that make a good sole practitioner attorney, because it's not just attorney, it's any entrepreneur kind of striking out on their own venture. You don't need to be the most brilliant mind, of our generation. You just need to be scrappy and resourceful, and that's really it. If you can, especially if you're somebody who likes to learn and wants to know, wants to take things apart to see how they tick and build things yourself, you're already kind of predisposed to this kind of career, in my opinion. But you really have to have a certain amount of grit and more than just, you have to have risk tolerance, obviously, but Beyond that, I think some level of, emotional fortitude, because the worst parts of this, and it's the same thing I'll say about the bar exam. The worst part of the bar exam is not the actual work. The bar exam itself is not fun, but is not impossibly difficult. It's, for me at least, the worst part of the bar exam experience was the anxiety. So the anxiety in the months leading up to it, while I'm studying, constantly wondering, like, am I doing enough? Like, what's everyone else doing? People are posting on Instagram that they're studying 10 hours. Like, what am I? I'm studying 5. It's like all these battling those kind of, doubts and internal questions and moving past them. I think the same thing applies to any kind of entrepreneur. Resilience is really the quality. Resilience and resourcefulness, knowing where to go to get what you need, because you don't need to have all the answers all the time. You just need to know where to find them or who knows them. And so that resourcefulness and then resilience, just, things are going to suck a lot, and being able to walk through that with your head down and get to the other side is the way that you keep going.
So let's dive into the specifics of growing a business for a few minutes. For audience members interested in starting their own business, what steps should they take to actually start and have a functioning business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, from a legal perspective, I can go into that in a second. But the first thing I'd say is, honestly, contrary to, I think, what a lot of folks in my field would say, I would not encourage you to get legal at the very, very beginning, before you've even tested your idea or made a sale or, figured out how any of this works. I've seen a lot of people spend a lot of money building out the infrastructure, laying the groundwork for their business before ever actually trying to do the thing that the business does, whether that's provide a service or sell a product or whatever, because it's, in my opinion, it's wildly easy and fun to do all the other stuff, to choose like what kind of software we're going to use, what's our logo going to look like, where are we going to put our office, like who are we going to hire, a virtual receptionist, are we going to have an assistant, what is all that, like that's a blast, everyone loves that, not everybody, but if you're an entrepreneur, you probably enjoy that kind of stuff. But and that's all fine and good. You need to do those things. But my advice would be really focus on actually delivering the thing that your business is supposed to be delivering, and validate that before you spend thousands of dollars on your marketing or on legal or on anything else. And so after you have figured out, and you don't necessarily, and this your mileage may vary here. If you're selling $100,000 service or product, on an annual basis, I would encourage you to get with legal before you do that. But that's not going to be most people. If you're starting, let's just keep it simple and say you're starting a landscaping business, figure out whether or not you actually are able to generate a couple customers and do the job well, before you spend a couple $1,000s with me getting your business set up. But after you've kind of validated that and have decided that you will stick with it, because entrepreneurs are notoriously fickle with, what they stick with and how committed they are. After you've committed to actually do this thing, the next step I always encourage my clients to make are generally making sure your business entity, generally an LLC, is set up the right way and getting a trademark. Those are the two primary things that we do. And so obviously I'm selling myself a little bit here, but taking myself I don't care if you do it with me or somebody else. Those are always the things I would encourage them to do. If you're a really, really local business only operating within your own small town, you may not need a trademark. But if you want to have any kind of online presence at all, whether that's socials or just like a domain or whatever, a trademark can be pretty important, just to make sure that you're not infringing on somebody else. So going through that search process is useful. And I've always got to kind of plug like the LLC situation. If you want to go through a LegalZoom or a provider like that, that's fine, until it's not. And you would never, if your business never experiences an issue, whether it's internally with like another partner or with a customer, you'll never know the difference. Most likely, you'll never know the difference. But if any issue of significance arises throughout your business's lifetime, you're going to really wish that you went through an attorney or a law firm to set things up the right way. Because I have seen personally when I did litigation before I transitioned over into kind of what I'm doing now, just on the business side of law, when I was in the courtroom, I saw clients lose hundreds of thousands of dollars regularly on bigger business clients because they didn't take the time to set things up right the first time. So I would, again, doesn't need to be me. I don't care if it's me, but I would encourage you to seek out some professional help with some of that stuff.
I think all that is so good, especially what you talked about of having your service delivery down first before you get your LLC, everything. I had to learn that the hard way because I first decided to start my business August of 2022, and that was when set up my LLC and everything, and I had a website, I had everything, but I had no idea how I was going to deliver my services, and so I had to learn that the hard way. I struggled with that for a long time. And then eventually, a couple months down the line, when I was trying new things, I realized that this time I have to focus on actually delivering my services for my clients. And then once I have that down, then I have to focus on everything else. And I feel like that's like the golden advice that if I got that in August, I would be much farther ahead than I am right now because that's so important. The service delivery and actually, like, I feel like that's like 99% of the business of actually making your clients happy. And then if they're happy, then you can grow through happy testimonials where they'll be like, oh yeah, they'll get you referrals. But if you don't have your service delivery down, then your client's unhappy, you're not getting new clients, and the whole business is just in shambles.
100%.
I feel like that's all really good. And off of that service delivery, I think the most important part of whatever you're doing, if it's a product or a service, I think it's providing value. And I feel like that's what business and entrepreneurship is. If you're able to provide value to someone in their business, no matter what it's in, I feel like you'll make money and be very successful if you have that value. What advice would you have for people that are looking to create that value but don't know how to?
Yeah. So if we're talking about creating value by, actually delivering on the service that you've been hired to do, um, I don't think it's rocket science in most cases. I would say that something important that I try to do is, like I mentioned before, just stay in my lane. There's a balance there of like you want to push yourself and stretch yourself and grow, but you also want to be very careful about making sure that you under-promise and over-deliver. So regardless of what your offering is, if it's a product, if it's a service, make sure you have the means to actually, because you hear a lot within kind of the entrepreneurial community, especially online, like socials, TikTok, stuff like that. Like, oh, just, make the sale and then figure it out later. And I can tell you that works sometimes, but it also leads to disaster pretty frequently. And I've seen that happen personally. And so what I would say is, make sure that you actually have a way, where you're up to 95% confidence that you can actually, before you take anybody's money, do what you're being paid to do. And a good way to do that is often to do it at a discount or do it for free a little bit for a few people at first to kind of validate that you can actually deliver on the thing. And after you have that validation and you've gathered a few reviews, that's essentially the exchange there is you do the work for free, but they give you a 5-star review. You've got some testimonials, you validated your idea, and you're good to go.
I think from there, the second part of the equation is once you have the value, once you have the service down, it's how are you selling to people? How are you selling your stuff to others? At Crosier Law Firm, what is the main way you market yourself? How do you grow your following and get new clients to go into business with you?
That is the golden question. The question that I've been asked by other solos who are even earlier than me or later than me starting their practices, by friends, every time I hang out with buddies from college and things like that. Like, oh, where are your clients coming from? And for me, I think this is always going to be industry specific to a certain extent, but I can provide some practical advice for most small businesses. I even recorded a couple little videos to this effect, because I don't think a lot of people realize how easy it is at the beginning to kind of build the right foundation. first step number one is to create a Google business profile, previously called Google My Business. And step two is to get as many reviews as you can. And a good way to do this, and people don't often know this or think this, but you don't need to just get, because the question then is like, well, I don't have any clients yet. From whom am I going to get these reviews? And the answer is anybody you know. The key here is not to be deceptive. We're not trying to trick anybody into thinking that we have 100 customers that we don't. But a really good strategy, and this was given to me by another attorney way back when, is reach out to peers, friends, family, and ask for character reviews. Tell them, I don't want you to pretend to be a client. I just want you to leave me a review and write what you think about me as a professional or person or whatever. And that will give you, if you can get, 25, 30 of those, go through every contact in your phone, try to get like 25, 30 at least to start. That will set the foundation for ranking you on the Google Map Pack when people Google, landscaper near me or something like that. It's wild how far that can get you, just that. And then as your flow of actual clients begins to come in, make sure you stay on top of each new client and try to get a review for every new client that you have. Not everybody's going to give you one, but you're going to need to ask 2-3 times at least. For most, almost no one will give you a review on the first ask, and it's not because they don't want to. They'll reply and say absolutely, and then they'll forget. So they need to follow up, and they need to follow up again. So stay on top of those things. Those things really matter. And that's a great way to kind of get, if you're especially like a local service provider, to kind of get your feet wet and get started.
So the last question I have on the business side of things is that at one point, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you'll always be very involved in the business until you take yourself out of it. At one point, you have to delegate, actually be it so that your business is functioning without you. And that's when you're actually considered an entrepreneur, because your business, you don't need to be there for your business to make money. And from an entrepreneur's point of view, that's where you want to be, because that's when you have financial freedom, location freedom, time freedom. You're in charge of your life. You have something going for you. So how important is it to delegate, and how do you plan to, or have you already delegated at Crozier Law Firm?
Yeah. So, I think delegation is really important. I mean, delegation is kind of the dream. Being hands off in the future, it depends. Not every personality is going to be inclined towards that. A lot of folks want to work in the business forever, but that's not probably who's listening to this, and that's not you or me. But there are a lot of folks like that, and so finding folks like that to delegate to is really, really useful. And so for us, we've done a little bit of delegation up to this point. I think that some folks make the mistake of delegating too quickly, because we've been fed this, what's the 4-hour work week? Is that the one? Things like that, that might, which is not I think an overall negative thing, but there's been so much focus in like the last decade or so on, do the least amount of work physically possible, and get rich. And the reality is, it takes time to get there. And there is no way around kind of taking your lumps and eating your vegetables until you're at a point where you can responsibly do that. Because if you do that too early, your thing is going to be awful and it's going to crash and burn. Because you're not going to have the capital to afford to hire quality candidates, and so you're going to find cheap outsourced labor from somewhere far away, and they're going to provide subpar service, and you're not going to get referrals, and it's tough doing it that way. And so, in my opinion, not that I'm the expert on this, but my opinion is always seek out quality talent and quality team members when and only if you can't get them right now, then wait. There are flexible options for that, like virtual assistants and things like that, which we've used in the past. But for me right now, the team at Current is mostly me and my paralegal, who is our trademark and business specialist, Brittany. And the two of us really, and my wife sometimes, but really the two of us kind of run the ship. And we work really well together. She's brilliant and does really great work. And so through working with her, I've kind of been able to lean into my strengths, which, to be completely honest, is more on the business development side of the practice management and business development. And I've been able to delegate some of the substantive tasks to her, the kinds of things that would normally be done by a legal assistant or a paralegal. And that has freed up a ton of time to generate new business, and is really invaluable. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be partnering with another firm here, probably at the beginning of next year, and that's going to open up more doors in the near future to hopefully hire more staff, get some associate attorneys in there, to really let me kind of take a step back, because my dream personally for my practice is that I could be fully on the practice management and business development side. It's a blast. I enjoy sales, I enjoy marketing, I enjoy getting new clients, and so that would be the dream.
Judging yourself for being happy or sad is like being upset at the weather. Some days it's sunny, other days it's rainy. Either way, it's just weather. Making yourself upset about it wastes a lot of energy, especially when the weather is going to change eventually anyways.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic quote. And kind of not including medical conditions like true depression and things like that. And just kind of speaking from my own experience as someone who doesn't suffer from that kind of thing. I have my ups and downs in business, and I totally agree that not getting hung up on the bad days, or more specifically the bad months, when things are a little bit tight, is really, really important. Being able to step back and see the bigger picture of, hey, things have been a little bit slow in, right now it's October, for example. Like, oh, maybe we have a slow October, but hey, we had a great September. And we'll probably have a great November, and just kind of keeping perspective, I think, is really important, and not letting yourself kind of, fall into that cycle of self-pity and things like that.
So, Jordan Peterson once talked about a study involving a rat that they put into a tube, and they put the smell of cheese in from the front, and there was a spring attached to the rat so you could see how hard it would pull. And you would think that it was starving, so it would pull really hard, but then they put a cat in from behind, and it pulled much harder. And that study goes to show that not only in life do you want to run towards things that you want, but you also want to run away from things that you fear. And I think that's a great frame to look at habits from, that when it comes to success, your positive habits are your cheese, that you want to run towards them, and your negative habits are the cat, you want to run away from them, you want to avoid them. What do you think about that frame, and what do you think about that study and what it shows about how you should treat your life, about habits?
No, I love that. I think that's great. And it's interesting. This is something I think about from time to time. What motivates me personally? Am I motivated by reward, or am I motivated by punishment, for lack of a better word, or or negative consequences? And for me, it's a mixture, as I think it is with all people. But I've kind of learned about myself, and I feel like this may be the case for most entrepreneurs, that it really is, I think, something of an even split, actually. As much as I want two things. I want success, as I define it. And I'm not going to pretend that, I'm doing all of this for a totally selfless, magnanimous reason. Like, I want our children's children to be set. Like, that would be wonderful if that could be the case. I want a comfortable life for my wife and I. I want us to be able to do things that we enjoy. And so I have a lot of motivation for, the cheese in that situation. Like, everybody wants the cheese. I want the cheese real bad. But I also, fear failure. And I don't want to, as much as I want to experience and kind of build this kind of life, I also fear the opposite. I fear, not making it, and letting everybody down, and the practice crumbling and having to come crawling back to another firm. And that, I think, in my mind, is an equally motivating force. And so those two things kind of work in tandem for me, and I imagine a lot of others, to kind of push us forward even when we don't feel like it.
So Kobe Bryant once said this: I was chasing perfection and excellence even though I knew I'd probably never catch it, but just the fact that I was willing to chase it, I would defeat most of my opponents because most of my opponents would never chase something that didn't have any guarantees attached to it. What do you think about that quote?
Man, these are solid. I don't know where you got these, but they're great. No, I love it. I really do, and I think it's true. I'm not normally a huge quotes guy either, so I'm not just blowing smoke here. It really, I totally agree. I think I've had this conversation with my wife recently that, you know, we've had some pretty good months recently, and in those months, I'm not just absolutely balling out, but I'm making significantly more than I would be at a firm in most places. And it really is, the thing I say over and over again is, this is not that hard. It really, I mean, it can be emotionally hard. That's the tough part. Again, going back to kind of like the bar exam example, it's more difficult dealing with the insecurities and the anxiety and things like that. Like, full transparency, like we've had some stuff blow up recently that has really weighed on me emotionally this last week, and so it's been a fairly tough experience. Just not to boohoo me, but just to be transparent, it's not all rosy all the time. But overall, it's been fantastic. And I think, as I'm talking to my wife, I think to myself, like, man, there are definitely kids in my law school class who are way smarter than I am, but they're not willing to make the jump. They're not willing to take this kind of risk. And I don't think that I'm better by any means for like being willing to do it. It just, I have a wire or two loose in my brain that like doesn't keep me from jumping over the edge. But I do think that, and I don't think that everybody who jumps over the edge makes it. I don't want to pretend that like everyone who risks it all is going to succeed, but there is something to high risk, high reward. And I do think that more people that jump would make it than you would expect. I think that most people assume, you're going to fall to the bottom, but in my own experience and the experience of other practitioners that I've met, kind of as I've been on this path, a lot more make it than you would think.
So I don't know if you're familiar with someone named Alex Hermosi. He's an entrepreneur. There's a quote from him that goes, "Hard times are opportunities to give yourself proof that this couldn't stop you." Do you think going through a hard time is a good thing or a bad thing? Because heartbreak, depression, financial struggles, although they can have a toll on our mental health, they also give us lessons that we couldn't learn anywhere else. And like Hermosi said, they also give you proof in the future of what you're actually capable of. What do you think about going through a hard time, and what advice would you give someone that's struggling through something?
Yeah, first off, I'm a pretty big Alex Hormozy fan. Obviously not alone in that. He's really blown up, but in a sea of woo woo hashtag entrepreneurship dudes and gals, I think he's pretty solid and provides some pretty good advice. I agree with that point entirely. I think that it's just in my own personal experience. I think there's the cliche phrase, pressure makes diamonds. It really, in practically speaking, I think you don't know how you're going to hold up against adversity, which you are certainly going to face in your business at some point until you experience it. And I don't know about you, but I would rather experience it earlier than when it really matters later. And so I think putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, and kind of gritting your teeth, to your question about if you're in it, how do you get through it? That's a tough question. It depends on the severity of the situation, but if it is something that can be pushed through, my advice is just bite down in your mouthpiece and keep moving forward, because everything will pass. And I can speak from experience. I was 100% set on dropping out of law school during second semester of my 1L year, due to kind of a handful of things that happened that I brought upon myself, to be fair. And it was my wife and my mother who really begged me not to, and I was 100% set on seeing myself out of there and decided to stick through it. And again, because of the circumstances I brought upon myself, it really did suck. It was not easy, but I have no idea where I would be right now if I hadn't. And so I would just say this too will pass. Put your head down, keep moving forward, and eventually you'll be looking back and thinking, look at that.
So this also goes into another quote of his, and I'm also like the biggest fan of him. I feel like he has a lot of valuable advice out there. He says, "You don't get confident by shouting affirmations in the mirror, but rather by having a stack of undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. Outwork your self-doubt." And this is a quote that always helps me get through whatever that I'm going through, whether it's, in my work, in life, anything. For me, it's always about building that stack of proof for myself. And that's what helps me be confident in myself. What's the importance of having that stack of undeniable proof for oneself?
I think it's really important. It's really the only thing you can look back to just repeat the quote, I guess. But in those moments of self-doubt, it's wonderful to be able to look back and say, oh, I've done this kind of thing before. Like, I've been there. And if I was able to get through it last time, I know I can get through it this time. And it really does go a long way in terms of building your confidence. Once you start kind of checking those things off the list, delivering on your promises, and developing that credibility. Credibility isn't just important externally, when it comes to like other potential clients or customers. It's important to you, to validate yourself. So yeah, I think that's great.
What do you think is the most valuable lesson that you have learned so far, and what experience drove you to learn it?
For a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, like, imposter syndrome is a regular thing that we struggle with. So like, I often, especially when I first started my practice, would ask myself, like, right before a client meeting, like, oh, like, what if they ask me a question I don't know the answer to? What if they ask me to deliver on something I can't do? And some really, really great advice I got from another really successful attorney is that you don't, and your client does not expect you to know everything. They only expect you to be able to figure it out. Now, I'll say that some clients expect you to know everything. But those aren't generally great clients. And it goes a long way to be comfortable saying, hey, yeah, that's a really great question. I'm going to take a couple hours to research that after our call, and then I'll shoot you an email and get right back to you. I've never had a negative response to that, ever, in my entire career in law, not just my solo practice. So just knowing, hey, being confident in yourself, fighting that imposter syndrome with like, it's okay that I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. Folks a lot older than me don't know anything. And that's okay. I just need to be able to know where to go to figure it out, whether that's a person or a place or a thing.
It takes light 3 years to get from the next closest star to Earth. If it took you 1 second to say the name of each star in only our galaxy, it would take you 3,000 years. And there are over 2 trillion galaxies. Your problems aren't as big as you think they are.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, at least in the context of business. I think that it's really important to be able to take a step back, because there are going to be lots of tough times, especially in the beginning, and the ability to, kind of have a macro perspective when things seem like they're on fire all around you, can really get you through a lot, because odds are, things may seem awful right now, but you are going to wake up tomorrow and it's going to be another day and time is going to continue on.
What are some of your favorite books, podcasts? Who are some of your favorite authors or people to learn from? Because we talked about this, and self-learning is very important. So when it comes to business, life, personal development, fitness, everything, who are some of the people you look up to, or what are some of the favorite books you've read that have helped you the most in not only your business, but also life in general?
To be honest, this is kind of embarrassing as an attorney, but I'm not a huge reader. I'm an audiobook guy, so I guess if that counts, I do read. I read some, especially commuting and things like that, going on trips, and whatnot. Lately, from a business perspective, Alex Ramosi has really had some good stuff out there. Again, I think I'm pretty sensitive to influencers in the business and entrepreneurship space because I think a lot of them are shysters. Most of them probably are shysters, but I think he puts out some quality stuff. I've read both his books that have come out and applied some of those principles to my practice, which I think have been good. There are a lot of other classic books that probably don't come to mind right now that I've either audiobooked or read on building a business and things like that. But thinking right now in terms of, for me, it's been more, there have been like a lot of attorney specific resources and things like that that I don't necessarily think would be applicable to everybody. But for example, there's a book called Solo. If you are an aspiring attorney looking to open a practice, there's a book called Solo by Choice that really goes through. It's meant for somebody like me who has always wanted to be a solo practitioner and kind of walks through the practical steps. I think books like that from folks who've actually done it themselves are really, really useful. I'm a fan of the lesser known practical books on, that are kind of the blueprints on how to do the specific thing rather than the kind of more inspirational philosophical books about, being your best self and influencing people. And I definitely think those have a place. But I've always been more of a practicality kind of guy. So those have been great. But even more than books, I would say people, and not necessarily figureheads like Alex Ramosi, but people that I know who have actually done the thing, who I can reach out to personally and say, hey, I'm experiencing this issue. Can you help me work through it? Or, hey, I'm really down on myself right now. Like, can you tell me things are going to be all right? I think that kind of thing, having those personal relationships are invaluable getting started.
Here's another quote. If everyone believes in your dreams, you're not dreaming big enough. What do you think is the importance of having dreams so big that people don't believe in them? And how do you think that they influence us and what we work towards?
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm going to twist that a tiny bit because something came to mind, but, something that as a perpetual people pleaser, advice that I have been given that I think has really rung true is that if everybody likes you, you're doing something wrong. And most people, if you decide to do the entrepreneurial thing, most people are going to be supportive. Like everybody, it's American dream, white picket fence stuff. Like everybody likes this stuff. But not everybody. And there are going to be people who are resentful of you, not necessarily like for your success. There will be people when you get to success who resent you for success for sure. But there will even be people who resent you along the way because, maybe I don't know, you're doing something that they themselves wish that they could do or would do, but haven't. And it's hard to understand. Like I take it really hard when somebody, has a problem with me, whether they're in the right or in the wrong. And it's something that in my personal life that I try to work through, and get better about. But just recognizing, it's been helpful for me to kind of repeat that and recognize if everybody likes you, nobody has a problem with you. If everybody believes in you, then you're doing something wrong.
What does a day in your life look like as a business owner?
So for me, every day is a little bit different. To give you, I love that question, and I consume a lot of content related to this, or mostly, before law school and practice and whatnot. But I think there's been a big kind of uptick in this kind of content and interest in this kind of content over the last few years, where you see a lot of people, the people running up to people in fancy cars, like, what do you do for, that kind of thing. But I really love it when people give really authentic answers about like, okay, because what I don't want to, you're like, oh yeah, I do sales. It's like, I want to know, like, where do you work? Like, do you walk into the office at what time? What kind of, are you checking your email first thing? Like, what's going on? And so to kind of give you a look behind the curtain, and this is not going to be particularly exciting, but For me, I work from home. We have an office space that I almost never go to. It's like a virtual office situation. So for me, it's wake up, go upstairs to the home office, check email, go. I usually will do a little bit of marketing in the morning because I'm the kind of person that like to get into work. It helps to do the things that interest me first, and then once that's kind of gotten me in the groove, it's easier to transition to the stuff that's less fun. And so I'll do some marketing, whether it's like content creation or whatever. Usually early on, and then after a couple hours of that, I'll transition into working on client matters. For me, a lot of that is either helping to set up businesses for clients, LLCs, corporations, stuff like that. Searching and filing trademarks. We've been doing a lot of contract review lately, and so reviewing, drafting contracts, typical corporate lawyer stuff. And so I'll do that for a little while. And to be completely transparent, like there's not a ton of my day taken up by that. Like it's usually a couple hours a day, maybe a few hours a day at most, unless we have something pressing. So it's not a bad gig. And so usually, before the work day is even over, I can kind of, move. Maybe we have plans early that evening, or I do boxing recreationally, and so I go to class at night. Sometimes I go to class in the morning, things like that. Making some time for myself is really nice.
So talk to me about boxing. What drove you to start it? Because I feel like this is true for me too. And I initially got into it in August, but I just wanted to have like a hobby that I'm pursuing. And I have a couple of these. So it's boxing, soccer, just the gym in general. I feel like it's very important to have those sort of sports, whether it doesn't have to be sports, just hobbies like reading or an instrument or whatever, just something to work towards, something to get better in. What drove you to pick boxing specifically, and how do you feel like that helps you with your business, with your work in general, with life in general?
Yeah. So, I think it's kind of cliche, but I do think that a combat sport specifically, and this is not my stamp of approval for everybody to get into combat sports, but sports like boxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, putting those together in MMA, I do think push you in a way that other sports traditionally can't, because there is an element of fear and danger. I think I listened to a podcast years ago on the art of manliness, and I think the podcast was called Professor in a Cage, and it was about this like liberal arts college professor who decided to do MMA for a year and then train to an actual fight and experience that. And he was a professor of literature, and he like documented the whole. He was like a very traditional, English professor kind of dude, not one you would normally see in the gym. But he documented kind of the personal development he experienced throughout that process of, getting humbled. And really, there's a lot of facing fear, true fear, if you're somebody who is in it to compete, even at an amateur level, which is something that I'm hoping to do here before too long. And so it really, honestly, it does a couple of things. When you're in your late 20s, everybody's trying to find a hobby. It's nice that you're trying early, because everyone else is going to do it when they're like 26, 28, 30. You'll see a lot of people pick up marathons, half marathons, 5Ks. Running is the most popular one because I think it's lowest barrier to entry. Some folks do Pilates. My wife Skylar does Pure Barre. Like everybody will pick something because, you don't have extracurriculars like you did in high school and college. And so you want something to fill that void. And in my opinion, weightlifting obviously is another one. Boxing or a combat sport is a great way to do that because it does, and I think, grow you and stretch you in ways that other things wouldn't. I've never feared for my safety, under a barbell, maybe a couple times, but it doesn't happen often. And I don't think, and I'm not saying endanger your life or your brain cells or anything like that, but it really, those moments of competition, of really pushing yourself physically and mentally, help with perspective. Going back to kind of zooming out at the end of the day. And when you're experiencing something really tough in the workplace, it's nice to be able to think, well, at least I'm not getting rocked right now because it's been harder in the past. Taking a punch to the liver is probably less pleasant than this guy's attitude that I'm having to deal with right now.
So this is true for business and just life in general, but oftentimes one of the most important skills to learn is dealing with other people because I think you'd agree that in at Crozier Law Firm, the law is a good part of it, but actually dealing with the clients, forming relationships with them, and not just clients, but also leads, your team. At one point when you delegate, when you partner with someone else, that partner that you're partnering with, you have to be able to form relationships with all these people and actually appeal to them. What advice would you have for someone who wants to get better at dealing with other people and just being more of a people's person? And a lot of people are introverts, so they're also very shy. How would you, what advice would you give them to be more extroverted, be more outgoing, and just deal with people in general? Because I feel like that part of the equation is also very important when it comes to business, when it comes to life in general, and also when it comes to success in general. Because if you know how to deal with people and you're good at something, you're going to be a lot more successful than someone who knows how to do that thing a lot better than you do, but they don't know how to deal with people.
That's a fantastic question and something I totally agree with. My advice, speaking as somebody who is extremely introverted, which a lot of surprises some people, but I'm very introverted by nature. It takes a lot out of me interacting on a daily basis, but it's also, I think there's an important caveat there. Being introverted does not mean that you dislike social interaction. I am certainly at my best when I'm around other people and having those conversations and developing relationships. It's my favorite thing to do, but it does take a lot out of me. That's the introversion aspect of that. Is at the end of the day, I have to go lay down and relax a little bit. And this is something that I have actively worked on, especially when it comes to things like public speaking, because that's a part of this, or it should be. If you're really trying to kind of develop yourself and grow your personal brand as well as which can help your business grow in turn, you're probably going to need to do some public speaking at some point, or at least I would encourage you to. And the best thing for me has been forcing myself into networking situations with organizations. This is I'm a fan of, again, practical solutions to these kinds of questions. So for me, I looked at who my ideal client is. They're, startups and early stage companies, entrepreneurs, folks like that. So my question was, okay, where are they if I want to do some networking? And lo and behold, there are lots of startup and entrepreneurship networking organizations and events in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's okay, great. And the next step was actually going to those and bringing a stack of business cards and shaking a bunch of hands and having a bunch of awkward conversations. And I really had to drag myself, kicking and screaming to the first one I went to, and really probably to the 10th one too. But after that, it got a lot easier. And I noticed that for weeks that I had events like that, I was much more on my toes when it came to client calls and, engaging with people, having smoother conversations, things like that. And so my suggestion would be that introversion, while the process of that being draining might necessarily never change, the feeling in the moment, the difficulty of it in the moment can drastically change. It gets so much easier with repetition, for sure.
What is next for you and Crozier Law Firm, and where can business owners who want to utilize your services find you?
So next for us is probably this merger, where we'll be combining with another. Really, what we'll be doing is probably forming a new firm altogether. But I'll be partnering with a close friend and mentor of mine here at the end of the year, and that announcement will come shortly. And our goal really is to build out the best boutique law firm for startups in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's what we're going to be going after. So more to come in that department. And if people want to find us, you can go to crosierlawfirm.com. That's Crosier, lawfirm.com. Link will be probably in the description here. We're on socials, Crozier Law Firm on Facebook, attorney.robbie on Instagram, and wherever else you can find us.
No, I'm very excited for everything you have coming with the partnership. I think it's going to be great. I think what you guys have in plan is going to be amazing. And I completely believe that you guys will be on track to be the biggest law firm for startups in Dallas, for sure. I really appreciate you for coming on and sharing so much value. And thank you so much for all the time you gave today.
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me. It's really been my pleasure. This has been great. And if I was to leave one parting word of advice, it would be just stay in the game. Things are going to get hard. Year one might be awful. Year two, you're going to want to quit. Year three might get a little bit easier. By year four and year five, things will probably really start looking up. So in those moments, write down on a sticky note, just stay in the game.